Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION @CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 25th of June 2025 from the Voices section. Venice, my part in ruining the wedding of a tech billionaire. This article is by Alison Rowett. From what little I know of her, like that's going to stop me, Lauren Sanchez is a doughty sort. The former TV reporter, children's author, space traveller, and fiancé of Amazon boss Jeff Bezos does not seem the type to sweat life's small stuff. But even she drew the line at the inflatable crocodiles. Miss Sanchez and Mr. Bezos are due to wed in Venice at the end of this week. It's a path that many couples have taken before them. They arrive, they get spliced, take some nice photos and go home, mostly without fuss. Alas, it has not been that way for the Sanchez-Bezos party. Since Venice emerged as the location, protesters have made it their life's work to be as big a pain in the posterior as possible. Their latest threat was to jam the area around one party venue with activists riding inflatable crocodiles. Not only has this forced the rewrite of a classic nursery rhyme, if you see an inflatable crocodile, don't forget to scream. It has meant yet another revision to the couple's plans. Bezos is on the run, said one protester. This is a crazy victory for a small group of people with no money who went up against one of the richest men on the planet. A resident told the Wall Street Journal, "It's absurd to treat this city like it's Disneyland. The message this wedding sends is that rich people can do whatever they want. We shouldn't kneel before wealth like this." Quite right. Except it is not that simple. Not all rich people are condemned equally. Remember the wedding of George Clooney and Amal Alamuddin in Venice in September 2014? Scotland couldn't go because we were busy with that referendum thing, but we sent a gravy boat from John Lewis and wished the happy couple well. In Venice there were no protests, no giant banners unfurled. Everything was sweetness and light for the Hollywood actor and his human rights lawyer partner. They were the right sort of rich, you see. It can be a tricky business sorting out which camp you are in, so I wouldn't be surprised if Miss Sanchez is puzzling over the rules. For instance, you can start off bad rich and end up good rich, like Carnegie. Or you could be relatively skint, but people think you are filthy rich and despise you accordingly. The Mitfords. Royal wealth is invisible and must not be criticized because, well, they do so much for the country, don't they? Don't they? Inherited, self-made, found, stolen. It's all money, money, money in the end. The rich have it and want to keep it, regardless of any upheaval they might have to go through. As reported in the Times on Tuesday, Britain will say cheerio this year to a record 16,500 millionaires, up from 10,800 in 2024, due to tax rises and the weak economy. It is not just the UK. The Henley Private Wealth Migration Report says 142,000 people worldwide with liquid assets of $1 million plus, that's 740,000, will pack their LV bags and go somewhere more wealth-friendly. This matters because they take their money with them. Dr. Jörg Sterfen of Henley and Partners, which commissioned the report, called the UK a cautionary tale in this new era of wealth migration. By his reckoning, £66 billion in investable assets has walked out the door. Imagine what that could do for the NHS or child poverty. Such redistribution sounds the stuff of make-believe, but not so fast. Nigel Farage, leader of Reform and the man some are tipping as the next British PM, has also been pondering the question of wealth. For a one-off fee of £250,000, says Farage, a rich person could buy a special Britannia card that spares them from having to pay UK tax on their overseas earnings. The money raised from the tens of thousands who would take up the offer would then go to the poorest 2.5 million, straight into their bank accounts. Bish, bash, bosh. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, described Farage's Robin Hood-style plan as a massive tax cut for foreign billionaires. Others said it would mean savage cuts to public spending and punishing tax rises to make up for what was lost to the public purse. Farage refused to answer questions on any of this at the media launch, insisting he wasn't clever enough. And anyway, the criticism sounded like completely off-the-wall nonsense. Now, there's a title for the manifesto when the time comes. So far, we have dealt with the conventionally wealthy, but fortunes come in many forms. You might have little in the bank, but live in a lovely place that others spend a fortune to visit. In Scotland, that could mean Edinburgh, Skye, somewhere on the North Coast 500, Glasgow, you name it. Others want a piece of it. So why shouldn't locals recoup some of the costs? As a tourist, you accept that, up to a point. Bezos has reportedly donated €1 million to local causes in Venice. Plus, he is spending up to 10 times as much on goods and services while he is here. That's a pretty good payday for most people. But no, we are supposed to be horrified at the vulgar excess of it all and the strain being placed on an already fragile environment. For Venice today, read Edinburgh or Skye tomorrow. Anyone would think Venice was some heavenly wilderness barely touched by human presence. That's not how I remember it. Gorgeous, yes. Impressive, certainly. But a place that had been relying for too long on maximizing the tourist buck. Venice should be saying thanks to the new Mr. and Mrs. Bezos, and in fairness, some are. Every visitor who ever put a sweaty paw on the ancient walls, or walked the city's alleyways, or bought an overpriced meal, has put a strain on Venice, not all of it made up by spending. It is a city that belongs to the world. Not one couple or one generation or one wealth bracket, but the world. So act accordingly. And if you get a minute, Lauren, drop us a line to say how it went. On an e-card, of course. That article was by Alison Rowett.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 26th of June 2025, from the news section. Dualtris architect, Soviet-era bunker House on Sky wins top award. Report by Jodie Harrison. It was compared to a Soviet-era munitions barrier and labelled a doomsday vault, while also being branded insensitive, drab and intrusive. And it would never have been built at all if Highland councillors had got their way, with plans binned at their insistence when they were sent for approval. But now architects are extending an olive branch to their detractors after a much criticised home on the Isle of Skye won a top award for design. The modest house at Torrin, designed by Dualchess Architect, is made from 3 interlocking larch-clad blocks which stand above the ground on steel posts. The main house has 2 bedrooms with further accommodation in a separate building, which helps frame the entrance and create a shelter from the prevailing wind. It was universally condemned by councillors during a planning committee back in 2018, with the design only being approved after their rejection of the proposal was overturned by a Scottish Government reporter on appeal. Now, judges for the Scottish Design Awards have agreed with the decision to overrule the local representatives, giving the now completed project a Gold Award and describing the way it frames the views of Blaven Mountain as stunning. Following the award, its designers are hopeful that the objectors will pay the home a visit and possibly think again. Dualchess Architect Director Neil Stephen. We always try to do design that is respectful of context and place, and we take that responsibility very seriously. We don't think the councillors appreciated what we were trying to do, and we'd invite them to come and see the completed build and hope they will have changed their minds. That article was written by Jodie Harrison and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 26th of June 2025. From the news section, Dundee University Principal, I'm not corrupt, I'm incompetent. Article written by Gabriel Mackay. The former head of the University of Dundee was torn apart in a fiery committee meeting at Holyrood, then refused to answer questions from the waiting media. Professor Ian Gillespie resigned as principal of the institution weeks after telling staff that job cuts were inevitable due to a significant deficit. The University of Dundee had to be bailed out by the Scottish Government due to a £35 million black hole in its finances, with a total of £62 million provided this year. Professor Gillespie was criticised heavily in the Gillies report into the crisis, which found he had an overbearing leadership style and disliked being questioned or having potentially awkward confrontations. Hearings are being held in the wake of the report. Amanda Miller, the former chair of the University Court, former Finance Chief Pete Fotheringham, and Dr Jim McGeorge, the former Chief Operating Officer, gave evidence yesterday, something Professor Gillespie said he did not watch. The principal tended to control the narrative to the court and elsewhere, painting a picture of all being well at the university, the report found. It said, there were many reports to this investigation that the principal frequently demonstrated hubris or excessive pride in his role. Hubris is relevant insofar as it can be characterised by dangerous over-self-confidence and complacency, often in combination with arrogance, contempt towards people who offer criticism, and obsession with personal image and status. The report concluded that cultural issues were not the primary cause of the financial collapse, but aspects may have facilitated or been associated with a lack of transparency. On Thursday, Professor Gillespie faced MSP questions at the Education, Children and Young People Committee. Opening questioning, convener Douglas Ross put it to the former principal that his leadership style was flawed, something the professor challenged. Mr. Ross said, why are you the only person who thought you were a good leader when Pamela Gillies makes clear in her report that your leadership was part of the problem here? The Conservative MSP directly accused the principal of lying to staff and students when, on February 28th, he said the university was moving into the surplus after a decade of financial deficits, while there was an £8 million hole in the budget. Professor Gillespie said, there was no lie there, there was no mendacity. It may have been incorrect, and I accept that it was incorrect. A big part of Wednesday's evidence centred around the breach of the university's banking covenant, which should have been, but was not, reported to the Scottish Funding Council. The former principal said his knowledge of the situation was very poor and only became aware of the 2023's challenge to the Covenant when he read it in the Gillies report. Mr. Ross replied, "Sorry? Say that again, because I can't believe what you've just said." Professor Gillespie was given £150,000 payout when he resigned from the University of Dundee and was quizzed repeatedly on whether he would repay that. He indicated that he would not, though later said he would discuss the matter with his family. Willie Rennie said, "You say your apology is heartfelt. I have to say I don't feel it. You didn't watch yesterday. You're not prepared to pay £150,000 back to the university. It doesn't feel like you really feel the pain other people are going through at this time. Do you understand how angry people are about that?" He then brought up a previous session where Professor Gillespie gave evidence to the committee in which he said universities in Scotland were quite well run and that he did not see any risk to survival of universities. The Liberal Democrat MSP concluded, "Were you delusional, or incompetent, or was there something else?" Mr. Rennie then asked Professor Gillespie if he felt people were afraid to challenge him, leading to a long pause after which the former principal said members of court certainly weren't afraid to. Ross Greer asked the former principal if he'd ever withheld information from the university court. He replied, "I certainly wasn't deliberately withholding information from the court. I would have conversations with the chair of court on specifics. I had a conversation as I began to see the severity, and the chair of the court's view was very firmly that she communicates with court members. There was sense that you speak when you're spoken to." The Green MSP said he found that hard to believe. The session concluded with some more questions from the convener, Mr. Ross. In his final question, he asked Professor Gillis whether he was incompetent or corrupt. The former principal replied, "I'm certainly not corrupt, so I have to choose incompetent." Following the session, he refused to answer questions from the media. Mary Senior, Scotland official for UCU, said, "The last 2 days of evidence in front of the Parliament's Education, Children and Young People Committee show clearly that the senior management of the university were completely out of their depth and that there was abject failure in leadership, planning, decision-making and financial oversight at the university. University staff and students simply cannot be left to pay the price for those failings." In a recent news interview, the interim principal appears to have ruled out compulsory redundancies, but subsequent communication makes clear that this is not the case. The lack of clarity only increases the tension and stress on staff whose jobs are at risk. We are calling on university management to rule out compulsory redundancies. The Scottish Government needs to strengthen the Scottish university governance to ensure greater scrutiny and challenge amongst governing bodies. The best model is increased transparency and openness, democracy and widening membership from among staff who have a thorough understanding of higher education. Melissa D'Adsezio, co-president of the Dundee UCU branch, said, "Staff have been shocked and appalled to watch the levels of incompetence that has unfolded before us at the Education Committee's evidence yesterday and today. These senior managers, including the ex-principal, walked away with thousands of pounds when staff and students have been through 8 months of worry, distress and turmoil and are still facing cuts to jobs and education. As well as apologies, we also want senior managers and governors to do their job properly and work collegially and transparently with staff and students." That article was written by Gabriel Mackay. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 26th of June 2025, Politics. Exclusive. Ex-Labour MSP Neil Findlay slams Keir Starmer's welfare cuts. Article written by Josh Pizzuto-Pomako. A former MSP who quit Labour over Keir Starmer's plans to cut disability benefits has said Scottish MPs who support the cuts are living in cuckoo land. Neil Findlay represented Lothian in the Scottish Parliament from 2011 to 2021. An avowed socialist, the former bricklayer occupied a number of positions in Labour's shadow cabinet during his time in Holyrood. Now a consultant, Mr. Findlay told the Herald, I question the sanity of these MPs. First of all, they will lose the moral high ground. But secondly, it is incomprehensible to me, even just out of self-interest. If MPs vote for the bill, there is no way it will enhance their chances of re-election. They are living in cuckoo land and need to wake up and smell the coffee. The Herald understands that 12 MPs, or 1/3 of Scottish Labour's Westminster contingent, have backed a reasonable amendment opposing the government's flagship welfare legislation. Mr Finlay resigned his party membership of 35 years in March over the vindictive and brutal cuts, which he said revealed party leadership's sneering contempt for the poor and disabled. In an open letter to Sir Keir, Mr Finlay wrote, "The reality is that Labour will be lucky to come third at the forthcoming Scottish election, will lose power in Wales for the first time, and faces being routed at the next UK election, and this will be down to your disastrous tenure as leader. MPs who continue to support your agenda are turkeys voting for Christmas." Mr Finlay echoed those comments, telling the Herald Sir Keir had betrayed Labour's working class values. He said, "I dealt with Starmer in 2018 when I was Shadow Brexit Secretary for Scottish Labour, and he was the Shadow Brexit Secretary for Labour at Westminster. We got on okay and had a decent relationship. He knew his brief, and I respected him. When he ran for leadership, he made a range of pledges which are not worth the paper they were written on. He took the membership for mugs, and has betrayed the values of the Labour Party." Mr Finlay warned that Scottish Labour would suffer at the next Holyrood elections if welfare cuts move forward. He noted, "Labour had a very wide margin of victory in 2024, but it was very shallow. There was no love for Starmer. People weren't running towards Labour, they were rejecting the Conservatives. Anna Sarwar would have been measuring curtains for Bute House last autumn, but they've certainly been put back in the box now. Starmer has betrayed so many people," Mr Finlay added. "Waspy women, pensioners, disabled people, to name a few." On Tuesday, he announced that defence spending would rise to 5%, but is cutting social security payments for people with disabilities at the same time. "It is disgraceful." Mr Finlay added, "People have basic needs. Housing, food, local services. If you face competition for these resources, for housing, for dental appointments and school places, it's all too easy to point the finger at someone else rather than the broken system. Labour needs to come forward with robust proposals to address the NHS and housing crises." That article was written by Josh Pizzuto-Pomacco and read by E. McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday, 26th of June 2025. From the politics section, exclusive. Scottish Blair-era minister warns Labour risks split over welfare bill. This article was an exclusive by Andrew Learmonth, political editor. Pushing ahead with planned welfare reforms could create a deep and lasting split in the Labour Party, a former minister has warned Sir Keir Starmer. Writing in the Herald, Brian Wilson, who served in Tony Blair's government, urged the Prime Minister to drop the Universal Credit and Personal Independent Payment (PIP) bill and start again. More than 120 Labour MPs, including a third of the party's Scottish contingent, are set to back a reasoned amendment in Tuesday's crunch vote, effectively derailing the flagship legislation. Ministers are currently locked in talks with backbenchers in a bid to see off the rebellion. The flagship bill aims to restrict eligibility for PIP in England and limit sickness-related payments under Universal Credit as part of a package aimed at saving up to £5 billion a year. It would also increase the basic rate of Universal Credit, in what the government claims is the most significant uplift in out-of-work support since the 1980s. But campaigners warn that 3.2 million disabled people could lose out, with up to 400,000 pushed into poverty. A coalition of 10 major disability charities has condemned the plans, while polling shows widespread public concern. Mr Wilson said that the government's failure to communicate the bill's benefits had left MPs exposed to fear and suspicion, accusing ministers of prioritising headlines about saving money over careful, consultative reform. There is an unanswerable case to be made for reform, he wrote, but it has to be built with far more care and credibility from the starting point of social justice, rather than working backwards from headlines about saving billions. He added, "There's nothing wrong with U-turns. Labour suffered no damage from reversing the winter fuel allowance cut. On the contrary, large numbers of natural supporters heaved a sigh of relief. So far, 12 of Scottish Labour's 37 MPs have signed the amendment, including Irene Campbell, North Ayrshire and Arran, Martin Rhodes, Glasgow North, Elaine Stewart, Ayrshire South, and Tracy Gilbert, Edinburgh South West." Ms Campbell told the Herald she had been considering the issue for quite some time and was swayed by feedback from constituents. "People are speaking to me about it when I'm in the supermarket or when I'm out and about. It's an area of real concern," she said. Although she praised aspects of the bill, such as efforts to move people into work and the universal credit uplift, she warned that ministers must slow down and reconsider elements relating to disability payments. After she could be won around, Ms Campbell said, "If they took into account what the amendment was asking for, then yes, I think everybody who signed it would be content." But she acknowledged the amendment could effectively kill the bill. "I know it's a tricky one." The growing revolt has prompted intensive efforts from Downing Street to limit the damage. A Number 10 source told media, "There is broad consensus across the party. We're talking to colleagues about the bill and the changes it will bring." On the early morning media round on Thursday, Trade Minister Douglas Alexander said there was a high level of agreement on the principles behind the bill, but he acknowledged disagreements over implementation. "The effect of what's happened with this reasoned amendment being tabled is that it's brought forward the discussion of how to give implementation to those principles," he said. Mr Alexander played down reports of internal tensions, including criticism of Sir Keir's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. "I'm much less interested in the gossip about SW1 than whether this legislation works in the streets," he said. Some MPs blame Mr McSweeney for misjudging the politics of welfare reform and are calling for a shake-up in Downing Street. The Times reported that some backbenchers believe regime change is needed. One Labour MP told the Press Association that ministers had left it too late to address concerns. "It's not a very good way of running the country. It's not very grown up." Another MP said minor tweaks would not suffice. "I don't think you can tinker with this. They need to go back to the drawing board." Labour insiders said the Prime Minister is reluctant to appear weak by performing another U-turn so soon after reversing plans to scrap winter fuel payments. But Mr Wilson said the political cost of ploughing ahead would be greater. "Who cares if the right-wing media mocks?" he wrote. A year into the job, Starmer can either liberate himself from the last of the big mistakes from these early months, or else, win or lose, create a deep and lasting split in his own ranks that should have never been forced upon them. Meanwhile, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar said that while there were many positives in the bill, he thought there were still conversations to be had about potential changes. Asked about the reforms at a live taping of the Holyrood Sources podcast in Edinburgh, he said, "My position has been quite consistent in the welfare reforms, which is, I support the principle of reform. We have to look at the structural challenges that exist in our welfare system, even with the changes currently being proposed." Pushed on whether he supports the rebellion, Mr Sarwar said, "Conversations are ongoing, as you would expect. People are legitimately voicing their concerns, having these conversations." Pressed again on his view on the potential revolt, Mr Sarwar added, "We have to support the principle of reform. What those reforms look like has to be balanced and has to be fair." And that article was an exclusive written by Andrew Learmonth and read by E. McKenna.
This article is from the Herald on Thursday, the 26th of June 2025. It is found in the Voices section, and the headline is, "Trump swore and I started to agree with him. What's happening to me?" And the report is by Neil Mackay. In The Art of War, the ancient Chinese military textbook, Sun Tzu wrote, "If you wait by the river bank long enough, Eventually, the bodies of your enemies will float by. It's a good maxim for life. Time and patience bring reward. With all due respect to the master tactician, however, I'd like to update the aphorism for the 21st century. If you watch TV news long enough, eventually Donald Trump will say something you agree with. On Tuesday evening, I found myself in the frankly remarkable position of nodding along with Trump. Momentarily, I thought I was going mad. I reckon even semi-regular readers of this column will be aware of my views on the US President. He is, I believe, a boil on the ass of humanity, a low-life criminal, a danger to democracy, a sexist boor, a grifting conman, an immoral narcissist, a cheap racist, a cowardly bully, a panderer to dictators, a petty and charmless thug, and a lumpen lout unfit to serve the public as a parking attendant, let alone the leader of the so-called free world. That said, however, Trump gained my brief and reluctant support when he categorised Israel and Iran as two countries who don't know what the F they're doing during a televised rant before the world's press. What was it that I liked about that speech from Trump, I wondered. It wasn't the content which won me. I believe the Israeli and Iranian government know precisely what they're doing. I think it was something about Trump's profanity which temporarily appealed. I'm aware how undergraduate that sounds. However, amid the stultifying mediocrity of most politicians, that flash of human emotion initially seemed, and I hesitate to say this regarding a man I despise, fresh. The more I thought about it, though, the more I realised that this sense of emotional honesty wasn't what I liked about the profanity. Clearly, Trump is regularly emotionally incontinent, usually at the expense of minorities and the weakest in society, whom he enjoys humiliating. So, if it wasn't the speech's content nor its emotion, what had appealed? It was, I finally worked out, the transgression. A president had said the F word, and something about that had struck a chord. In that moment, I felt some understanding of Trump's supporters. Trump is unafraid to transgress any rule. If you harbour sexist, racist urges, he's your avatar. I've always had a soft spot for rebels, for anyone who gives the finger to authority and refuses to play by the rules. I hate pearl-clutching nonsense about sexual morality or profanity. I like music that shocks, novels which offend, movies that make the head of the purity police standing on end. So, Trump's explosive F word was, to me, a little cultural glitch I could momentarily enjoy, even if it came courtesy of the one man on earth I'd like to see disappear into outer space. But Trump's F word is much more significant than its ability to bring a smile to the chops of a 50-something bloke overly influenced by punk, hip-hop and grunge. Indeed, Trump's F word opens the window to understanding the relationship between him and his supporters. So much of Trump's success, so much of the success of the far right globally is about busting boundaries. MAGA politicians and their European imitators started out saying things which were frankly deemed too crude and ugly for polite society. Back in the mid-2010s, straight-up sexism, racism and homophobia just didn't pass the dinner party test. Trump et al. Said the unsayable, signalling to fellow travellers that it's okay to feel this way. Eventually, boundaries were being stretched to absurd proportions. They're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats. In a way, it's a form of grooming. Trump seductively whispers in your ear, "Go on, do what I did. It feels good. You know you want to." Now, anything goes, and that keeps Trump in the driving seat as he's the boundary buster who decides which rules can be broken. Authoritarians must constantly stretch the public's boundaries as by their nature they carry out acts which shock us. If the public is kept in a constant state of confusion over what is and isn't permissible, then the authoritarian's path is much more clear. Trump's F word pushes the boundaries of political language. Now, watch as imitators around the world try to follow suit. Some desperate political charlatan, either here or elsewhere, will drop an F word or a C word just to show they're with the zeitgeist. It will be interesting to see how MAGA's evangelical wing reacts. They're down on cussing, so we'll have to carry out tortuous mental and semantic contortions to excuse his profanity. But excuse it they will, rest assured. The folk who constantly wail, "Won't someone think of the children?" will most certainly not be focused on Trump exposing kids to foul language live on TV. There is evidently a wider discussion to be had about good taste and what is and isn't appropriate anymore. Does Trump saying the F word live on TV and it being aired without any beeping out now give everyone carte blanche to run around swearing like drunken sailors? Should British politicians be excused for hollering the W word at each other in the heat of the moment? Can we start shouting profanities in the boardroom? I'm far from some mimsy Mary Whitehouse. I enjoy a well-placed F word, if you know what I mean. But there's a threshold, a boundary, which our friend the F word shouldn't cross. If my kids were still little, I don't think I would have been best pleased having to deal with them running round the garden shouting the F word after they'd heard the President swear. Nor do I want to see our Prime Minister, the Starmer bot, start dropping F-bombs all over Parliament in a bid to be seen as hip and relevant. In the end, what I experienced from Trump's F word was a perfect case of Trump doing what Trump does best. He gave me a short-term jag of transgressive pleasure in return for a long-term hit on decency in public life. That report was by Neil Mackay. These letters are also from a selection in the Herald on Thursday the 26th of June 2025 and are found in the Voices section. Will protest be outlawed? So now we know. If you kill 56,000 Palestinians, injure and maim around 120,000 more, and leave over 40,000 children orphaned, neither Sir Keir Starmer nor David Lammy will call you out as a terrorist state. However, if you stage a protest against all this at an RAF base and smear a couple of planes with paint, you will be prescribed as a terrorist organisation by a Labour government. It is surely only a matter of time before Sir Keir moves to classify pro-Palestine marches and demonstrations terrorist as well. After that, who knows? Waspy women? Scottish independence campaigners? Once government ministers begin to crack down on civil liberties, the UK will be well and truly on the way to becoming an authoritarian state. No doubt Donald Trump would approve. Alan Woodcock, Dundee. And finally, better news for Scotland. Among all the bad news, what a pleasure to get to page 8 of today's Herald, June 25, and read the caption under the photograph headlined The Big Picture. According to research done for the big issue, child poverty is down 12% in Scotland, while it's up 15% in England. So, some good-ish news for Scotland, and yet more bad news for England, and however many Keir Starmer supporters there are left. Patricia Fort, Glasgow.
From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 28th of June 2025, from the news section, 90 jobs at risk at Fife firm that supplies parts to Alexander Dennis. Article written by Nick Forbes. Staff at a Fife manufacturing firm that supplies parts to Alexander Dennis Limited, ADL, have been told that 90 jobs are at risk of being made redundant. According to the Courier newspaper, Dunfermline-based Greenfold Systems confirmed on Friday that a notice of risk of redundancy has been issued to its employees. The company said it was the result of plans announced by bus manufacturer ADL, one of Greenfold's major customers, to close its Scottish sites in order to consolidate its manufacturing business at a single site in Yorkshire. Greenfield specialises in metal fabrication, cable and wiring, kitting and assembly, with reportedly about half of its staff working in constructing the side, interdecks and roofs of buses for ADL. Speaking to the Courier, Greenfield Systems Managing Director Craig Watterson described ADL as a sizable customer and said it was a difficult situation for the company. What happens with ADL remains to be seen. We would, of course, like a clearer answer, but we're not going to get one anytime soon, he said. A communication has been issued to staff, essentially telling them that their jobs are at risk as a result of the ADL situation. We will give another update when we know more. We are weighing up life with and without ADL. ADL Director Paul Davies told a committee of MPs on Thursday that the closure of its Scottish sites was not a done deal, but that orders for up to 100 buses and changes to regulation would be needed before the end of the year. Earlier this month, the company said it could lose as many as 400 jobs, about 22% of its workforce, if plans to close its Falkirk plant and cease operations at the nearby Larbert factory go ahead. Scottish Liberal Democrat economy spokesperson Jamie Greene MSP said, "This will be an extremely difficult time for the workforce at Greenfield Systems, and my thoughts are with them today. The SNP's failure to support bus building and buying in Scotland is inflicting a chain reaction of misery for workers and local communities across the country. If the SNP government are serious about delivering for our economy, they should be sitting down with the firm to thrash out a solution and finally get behind Scottish manufacturing." Secretary for Business and Employment Richard Lockhead said, "I am very disappointed to learn that Greenfield Systems Limited has entered into consultation with a view to making redundancies at its Dunfermline site. This will be a difficult time for the employees at risk of losing their jobs, their families and for the local area. Scottish Enterprise will engage with the company to better understand the reasons for this decision and whether it can offer any assistance. The people affected by this announcement are our immediate priority, and the Scottish Government will do everything in its power to help those affected through an initiative for responding to potential redundancy situations, Partnership Action for Continuing Employment." That report was written by Nick Forbes and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 28th of June 2025, from the news section, Cash machine near Glasgow robbed in early morning break-in. Report by Donald Erskine. A cash machine in a supermarket has been broken into and cash stolen from it in the early hours of this morning. Police were called out to the scene in Lenzie, where they discovered a store had been broken into and money had been robbed from the ATM. The store on Kirkintilloch Road was targeted by the thieves early this morning at just after 2 a.m. Police say their inquiries are ongoing and are appealing to anyone with information to come forward. A Police Scotland spokesperson said, "Around 2:15am on Saturday, 28th of June 2025, we received the report of a break-in and theft of cash from an ATM at a premises on Kirkintilloch Road, Lenzie. Inquiries are ongoing, and anyone with any information is asked to contact 101, quoting reference 0464 of 28 June 2025. That article was written by Donald Erskine. From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 28th of June 2025, I guess from the politics section, how an Edinburgh by-election turned to a night of high drama. Article written by Donald Turville, Edinburgh correspondent. Local by-elections are characteristically predictable, even dull affairs. Often, they are a done deal long before ballots are cast and votes are counted, confidently seen as safe bets for a particular party and passing by with little fanfare or public attention. But every now and then, these contests turn unexpectedly exciting, offering a glimpse of which way the political winds may be blowing more broadly. In the run-up to polling day for Edinburgh's Fountain Bridge/Clare Lockhart by-election on Thursday, campaigners of all stripes agreed all bets were off, as it looked to be a tight race with no obvious favourite. The seat was being defended by Labour, with the contest triggered by the passing of their councillor, Val Walker, in April. Shortly after 11:30, the brightly lit room in the council's headquarters where votes were being counted started to fill up. Candidates, election agents, and other spectators were laser focused on 3 green lime barns of equal length displayed on 2 large screens which suggested a 3-horse race between the Liberal Democrats, Labour and the Greens. Among the steady hum and clicks of ballot counting machines, I heard one season's local political break their nervy silence. I've never seen anything like this before. Usually, at this point in a count, a clear winner emerges, but the only one thing was certain. This was going to be an abysmal result for the Conservatives, who got the most first preference votes by a comfortable margin here in 2022, but were now trailing behind the 4 other main parties. Earlier in the night, a council press officer estimated we'll have the result by midnight, so, as the clock struck 12 with no verdict, it was a clear sign of just how close the race would be. I was distracted from clock watching by a huddle of Liberal Democrats in the corner who appeared determined to keep a poker face. Standing nearby, one of their councillors was on a call, hanging on every word. All of a sudden, he let out a roar and bounded back to his colleagues who cheered, clapped and embraced each other. We had a result. While the declaration of first preference votes reveals who voters ranked first, it's far from the full picture, especially on a night like this. On the first preferences, Labour were just 24 votes ahead of the Lib Dems, with the Greens behind them by 136. By the 7th round of transfers, Labour still had to lead it by 26, narrowing to 14 by the 8th. At the next stage, when the Reformist candidate was eliminated, 33 votes were transferred to Labour and 43 went to the Lib Dems, with the former ahead by just 4. At stage 10, the SNP dropped out as their second preferences were fairly evenly split between the 2 frontrunners, nudging Labour's lead up to 22. It wasn't until the 11th round of counting that the Lib Dem candidate, Kevin Mackay, pulled ahead, gaining 387 next preference votes from the Tories compared to 166 for Labour. After the Greens were eliminated, the final margin between the top 2 stood at 97 votes. This all comes with the important caveat that a 33.1% turnout means the vast majority of voters in the area either didn't care enough to cast a ballot or were blissfully unaware the by-election was taking place. While typical for a local by-election turnout, this nonetheless paints a bleak picture of a local democracy. For the Lib Dems, this wasn't just an impressive turnaround from their 7.1% share of first preference votes in the ward back in 2022, but also much needed redemption after a humiliating turn of events following a council by-election in Edinburgh last November. A single-seat contest in Collington/Fairmilehead produced a similarly impressive result, rising from 4th place in 2022 to 1st, increasing their share of first preferences by 23.9%. Corks had barely popped from the champagne bottles when a tabloid newspaper revealed the Lib Dems' new councillor Louise Spence, who had positioned herself as a local candidate against rivals from outside the area, put her house on the market the day after she was elected. Reports suggested she planned to move to Dubai and split her time between there and Edinburgh. She resigned after just a week in office, and the Lib Dems were subsequently trounced in the by-election rerun in January. Mackay, Lib Dem councillor Kevin Lang, assured me that after the result was officially declared in the early hours of Friday was definitely not planning a relocation. If there's one thing we learned a lesson from last November, it's that, he said. This has probably been the most extraordinary council election I've been involved in 20 years in Edinburgh politics. I've never known such an even contest. Every party it felt like was in the contention. Even as you got to the final number of first preferences cast, it wasn't clear who had won. I've never known anything like that, and I'm just glad that on a night of high drama like that, it's my party that ends up on top. We've had other by-elections in Edinburgh where we've moved forward, and it shows we are a party that is on the up in Edinburgh. We go into not just next year's Scottish Parliament election, but the council election in 2027 with real ambition and optimism. But before then, the council's Lib Dem group will once again face questions over whether they will take advantage of the increased headcount and seek to take control of the council. Their win deals yet another blow to Labour's control of the local authority, now with just 11 councillors of a total of 63 in the city chambers. Whether the Lib Dems will continue to prop up a minority Labour administration alongside the Conservatives or make a bid for power themselves will now be the focus of internal party discussions. Councillor Ed Thornley, Lib Dem group leader in Edinburgh Council, did not rule it out. "We've been the second largest group for a little while. That is an additional one to our number," he said. What that means we don't know yet, because nobody knew who was going to win this by-election, and anyone who did is having you on. That report was written by Donald Turville and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald, Saturday the 28th of June 2025, from the news section. Man arrested after armed police race to incident in Ayrshire town. Report by Mark McDougall. A 33-year-old man has been arrested after armed police attended a disturbance in East Ayrshire on Saturday morning. Police were called to the scene after a man was found injured in Cross Street in Galston at around 8:05 a.m. The 55-year-old was taken to hospital for treatment, and inquiries are ongoing into the incident. Armed police were needed as officers dealt with a subsequent disturbance at the same property involving a second man. The 33-year-old has now been arrested in connection with the incident, and officers remain in the area. A Police Scotland spokesperson said, "A 33-year-old man has been arrested in connection with a disturbance at a property in Galston. At around 8:05 a.m. on Saturday 20th of June 2025, we received a report of a 55-year-old man having been injured in Cross Street. He was taken to hospital for treatment and inquiries are ongoing. Officers attended at the property where there was a subsequent disturbance involving a second man. The 33-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the disturbance and inquiries are ongoing." That article was written by Mark McDougall and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 28th of June, from the news section. Man jailed for 4 years after using imitation gun to rob post office. Report by Mark McDougall. A man has been jailed for 4 years after pleading guilty to armed robbery. John Clark, 20, used an imitation gun to rob a post office in Edinburgh in September 2023. He pled guilty at the High Court in Glasgow on Wednesday, March 26, before being sentenced to 4 years in prison at the same court on Friday, June 27th. Clark threatened his staff who were working before making off with a sum of money. Detective Constable Chris Stewart said, "This was a terrifying experience for those involved, and Clark will now face the consequences of his actions. I hope this outcome provides some reassurance to the victims. We remain committed to thoroughly investigating violent crime and ensuring those responsible are held to account." That article was written by Mark McDougall and read by Ian McKenna.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 30th of June 2025, from the Voices section. Brexit destruction. Stupidest and unhinged, fair enough. Article written by Ian McConnell. It is now more than 9 years since the UK electorate voted for Brexit, but the issue, most justifiably given the damage it is causing to the economy and living standards, remains firmly in the headlines. Businessman and former mayor of the city of New York, Michael Bloomberg, last Monday declared Brexit was the single stupidest thing any country's ever done. It would surely be easy to make the argument that he hit the nail on the head. After all, it is certainly not wise decision-making which is behind a move to cause major damage to your economy. Mr. Bloomberg, who was visiting his eponymous company's Dublin offices exactly 9 years after the UK's referendum, added of Brexit, "It's hard to believe how they did it." It is indeed difficult to believe as the nightmare continues. Mr. Bloomberg's comments evoked memories of what Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Glasgow, had to say about Brexit in the aftermath of the vote. Sir Anton told the Scottish Government Brexit Summit for Further and Higher Education back in November 2018, "I've previously referred to our impending exit from the EU as the most unhinged example of national self-sabotage in living memory. Nothing has happened in the last few weeks to change that view. Indeed, with the confusion and uncertainty we are seeing every day in Whitehall, if anything, my view has only hardened. This was before former Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson's administration took the UK out of the European single market at the end of December 2020 in a hard Brexit. This folly saw the ending of free movement of people between the country and the European Economic Area and the loss of frictionless trade with the UK's biggest trading partner. So words such as unhinged from Sir Anton and stupidest from Mr. Bloomberg seem perfectly measured and proportionate in the scheme of things. What is also hard to fathom, based on any economic rationale, is the Labour government's red lines of not taking the UK back into the European Union, single market, or even the customs union. That said, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and Labour look to be far more focused on politics than economics when it comes to Brexit, and specifically appear terrified of upsetting those red wall voters who swept Mr Johnson to power in December 2019. It was this general election victory which enabled the incredibly foolish hard Brexit for which we are all paying the price, Leave and Remain voters alike. My column in the Herald last Wednesday focused on a YouGov poll which surely yielded some interesting findings for Sir Keir and Labour, observed, "Les Britanniques regrettent beaucoup." Noting the 9th anniversary on June 23 of the vote for Brexit, the pollster declared, YouGov polling has long since shown that the public are regretful about that outcome, with our latest survey showing 56% think it was wrong for Britain to vote to leave the EU. My column observed, there might still be the sounds of "Non, je ne regrette rien" from those who voted for the folly, and some of those who led voters down the Brexit path continue to bump their gums rather noisily. However, the quieter majority clearly knows what is actually going on. YouGov's latest findings show, as its polls have for years now, a clear majority believes the UK was wrong to leave the EU. Only 31% now think the UK was right to leave. The YouGov poll found most people in the UK want to see the country return to the EU, 56%. This is way ahead of the 34% opposing such a move, with 10% of those polled saying they do not know. Sir Nick Harvey, Chief Executive of the European Movement UK Campaign Group, said on June 22nd, Labour's red lines on its relationship reset with the European Union, including no return to the single market or the EU customs union, must now be revisited and revised. The reasons why will not have escaped the government's notice, even if it does not want to look in their direction. His observation about Sir Keir's administration not wanting to look at the reasons is an astute one. Not only is Labour sticking with its red lines, but it continues to refuse to acknowledge the scale of the Brexit damage. My column last Wednesday, noting another finding of the YouGov poll, observed, the fact that 56% of those who voted for Labour last July consider rejoining the EU to be the right priority right now raises the question of why Sir Keir and his colleagues seem hell-bent on going along with the views of the minority in their policy making. Labour has made it clear that it is absolutely intent on maintaining its red lines, a truly lamentable state of affairs. Sir Nick said, 9 years have passed since the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. In that time, the consequences for the British people have become increasingly stark. This latest polling not only reinforces that, it shows that more and more people see the benefits of much closer ties with the European Union, having felt the pain of Brexit. Leaving the EU has delivered a sustained and worsening blow to the UK economy, one that is especially pronounced for the small and medium-sized enterprises that form the backbone of our commercial and industrial landscape, who are living with the consequences every day. That has made us all poorer, depleted our economy, and weakened our country with 1,000 tiny cuts. There is surely much food for thought in these comments, is there not, Sir Keir? That article was written by Ian McConnell and read to you by Elizabeth. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 30th of June 2025, from the Voices section. This bill should be defeated and never return. Article written by Ros Foyer, STUC General Secretary. A good old-fashioned parliamentary dust-up seems quite tame compared to the political tsunamis that have engulfed our parliaments in recent years. From referendums to Brexit to COVID, there have been plenty of disruptive events that haven't always painted our institutions in the greatest of lights. But this most recent one matters, more than most. It's heartening that we have seen a rebellion in the ranks from the new UK Labour cohort to their government's reforms to welfare. As unamended, the Pathways to Work Green Paper was far from green. It was blue, and might as well have been typed on Tory-headed letter paper. As I am writing this column, details are emerging of a significant, if still insufficient, softening in approach. Whatever its final form, I remain of the view that this bill should be defeated and never to return. It is predicated on an instinct to punch down rather than punch up. It also still contains an underlying narrative that people are at it, rather than getting to the heart of why so many people who want work can't get it, and why so many jobs are ill-suited to the very real barriers that sick and disabled people face. It seems now that some of the key provisions of the bill will not affect current claimants. There is also the undertaking to engage in consultation and design with disabled people at the table. Though it is breathtaking that this is a late concession rather than an obvious first step in policy redesign. Don't get me wrong, there is a need to increase funding to support people that can work into work, but legislating to take billions from disabled people before supporting them into fulfilling employment is putting the cart before the horse. It has been clear since this pernicious legislation was first mooted that its supposed raison d'etre, supporting people into work, is fatally flawed. Government ministers have formed an orderly queue to be savaged one by one in the broadcast media in defence of this position. In fact, these reforms are more likely to push disabled people out of the labour market than into it. Personal independent payments go to people in work as well as out of work. They are a payment to account for the additional costs of living disabled people face. If you are no longer able to finance a wheelchair-accessible vehicle, are you going to be more likely to go to work every morning? No, you are not. We are meant to be relieved that the so-called 4-point rule, effectively saying that a disabled person's life can be intensely difficult in many ways, but they won't qualify for a payment unless it is impossible in one way, will only apply to future claimants. I'm sorry, but I won't be getting out the ticker tape to celebrate a fundamentally discriminatory measure which adds to the generational disadvantage in rights, employment and pensions which younger people are already expected to endure. The truth is that the increasing number of people in receipt of PIP and UCLCWRA is a symptom, not a cause. It's a symptom of an ageing population, of increased recognition of the debilitating nature of some mental health conditions, and of the COVID pandemic. The failure to support more people back into work is a symptom of an aversion by many employers to undertake the reasonable adjustments disabled people need, and a preference for dismissing people with ill health rather than supporting them to remain in the workplace. In this context, it takes an interesting type of politician to think that one of the first ports of call after taking office is to target our vulnerable rather than tax the wealthy. Under the initial proposals, analysis from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows that 400,000 people would fall into poverty because of the measures, 50,000 of whom would be children. These impacts will now have reduced, but they most certainly have not gone away. Disabled people, along with their children and families, already face a significantly higher risk of poverty and destitution. In fact, 63% of those experiencing destitution in the UK are disabled or live with a long-term health condition. Moreover, with funding consequential impacts, there will be a clear knock-on effect to the Scottish Government's ability to mitigate yet more UK government austerity. Further to this, we have research from Citizens Advice Scotland, who uncovered 40,000 disabled households going without food, scrimping and saving on the electricity in order to charge their medical equipment. Glasgow Disability Alliance found 71% of their members couldn't survive on social security nor work, with many going without utilities, food or essentials. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's us, the unions, charities, support groups and anti-poverty organisations. Maybe it's disabled people themselves. Maybe we're all wrong. Maybe we just made it all up and imagined in a hazy fever dream that disabled people aren't skipping meals or going cold at night. Or maybe, just maybe, it's politicians more concerned with appeasing rich corporate interests of the wealthy and plough ahead on the assumption that the sick, infirm, elderly or disabled won't be able to organise against them. They would be incorrect. The Poverty Alliance has rallied those tasked with defending those targeted by these reforms and made our opposition clear. More than 100 charities and civil society organisations united to tell Scottish MPs and the Secretary of Scotland directly to change course. Peter Kelly, Chief Executive of the Poverty Alliance, said, "People are desperate for the UK government to deliver a just and compassionate society, but these proposals will deliver the opposite. If enacted, these cuts will mean more disabled people living in poverty, relying on food banks and pushed into destitution. That's not the change people voted for at the last general election." He's absolutely right, and it simply doesn't have to be this way. This approach is neither Labour values nor the values of the Labour movement. We need humanity, empathy, and a focus on redistributing wealth from the top 1% to those in need. The rabble-rousing Red Rebels should therefore be on notice that the electorate is watching. We'll remember all those who stood alongside those in need of support, and note with interest those who didn't. Ros Foyer is General Secretary of the STUC. The article was read to you by Elizabeth.
From Herald, Scotland, 25th of June 2025. From the STEM section of the business section. Dozens of pro-Indy accounts went offline when Israel bombed Iran. Article by Jodie Harrison. Dozens of social media accounts advocating for Scottish independence appear to have gone offline simultaneously the day Israel bombed cyber infrastructure in Iran, it has been reported. The UK Defence Journal says that the accounts simultaneously went silent on June the 12th as Israeli warplanes targeted sites in the Middle Eastern country. Many had posted hundreds of times per week on X, formerly Twitter, often using pro-independent slogans, anti-UK messaging and with identities such as NHS nurse or Glasgow socialist. But all have stopped issuing messages at the same time and have remained silent since. The sudden disappearance was picked up by other users of social media platforms and is being described as the most visible rupture to date in a long-running foreign influence operation by the journal. It accuses Tehran of deliberately using the Scottish independence issue to weaken its adversary by amplifying internal division through its concentrated and covert social media campaign. The use of automatic bots and AstroTurf or sock puppet, i.e. fake accounts, on social media by state actors and rabble-rousers is a known phenomenon, with Russia often suspected of deploying such techniques to guide narratives around divisive topics such as immigration. It is also suspected that it has been used to influence elections. However, the existence of such a wide-ranging network has never been proven. One veteran open-source intelligence researcher told the journal, "The timing, posting patterns and network structure all point in one direction. What we're seeing is classic IRGC-linked activity. Coordinated accounts posting at regular intervals, linguistic and thematic uniformity across profiles, and sudden synchronous silence. The kicker, is infrastructure dependency. These accounts didn't log off, they were cut off almost certainly because their command and control layer, likely hosted through Iranian VPN exit nodes or proxy managed access platforms, went down after the strikes. They added, "This kind of abrupt network-wide halt is a textbook signature of an externalized influence operation losing its operational back end." A study by researchers at Clemson University's Media Forensic Hub previously identified more than 80 accounts posing as socially conscious British users. Many carried biographies such as ex-NHS nurse, hopeful for a better future with a lot less inequality, designed to appear credible to domestic audiences. The Clemson team concluded that these accounts were likely operated by or on behalf of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Their objective appeared to be the amplification of domestic political tensions in the UK, particularly around constitutional issues. Since late 2021, the network produced around 250,000 tweets designed to blend into genuine political discourse and engage real users. The content mixed pro-independence rhetoric with populist criticism of the UK government, anti-monarchy sentiment, and solidarity with progressive causes. One tweet, which was viewed over 1 million times, stated, "The people robbing this country travel by private jet, not by dinghy." Another drew attention to Prince George receiving flying lessons at age 11, contrasting it with worsening poverty across the UK. According to Clemson's analysis, the network was responsible for at least 4% of all Scottish independence-related discussions on X in early 2024, 4 times more than the official SNP account over the same period. And that article was written by Jodie Harrison. From Herald Scotland, 29th of June 2025. From the STEM section of the business section. Landowners threaten to walk away from 5G connectivity scheme. And this is an exclusive by Rebecca McCurdy. Landowners in Scotland are threatening to walk away from a national 5G connectivity scheme over stringent rules. The UK government has been accused of doubling down changes that allow the telecommunication firms to override existing rent agreements for cheaper deals. Private and public landowners warn they have already lost out on around £200 million each year following significant changes made in 2017. Changes to the Electronic Communications Code mean that telecoms firms were no longer required to pay market rent to landlords, with some landowners witnessing a 90% reduction in annual fees. It affects landowners, including farmers, but also affects councils, charities and small businesses. In some cases, rents originally agreed at around £5,500 per year fell to £3.50 per year, with landowners also stating they feel trapped in the agreement. The UK government is consulting on changes to the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure (PSTI) Act that could see landowners refuse to allow the equipment on their property, and therefore slowing down key connectivity targets. Russell Glendinning, Managing Director of Cell CM Chartered Surveyors, a firm representing landowners of telecommunication infrastructure, said the implications would be chilling. Mr. Glendinning told the Herald on Sunday, "Scotland's digital rollout is being undermined by a failed UK-wide legal framework. Changes to the 2017 Electronic Communications Code have significantly strained the relationship between landowners and mobile operators, Many site providers have been drawn into lengthy and complex disputes in an attempt to protect operational requirements at their property against operators' technical and operational needs, often coupled with steeply reduced rents, and in some cases, site owners have been ordered to repay substantial sums. This has created a chilling effect on the willingness of both private and public landowners to host infrastructure. Landowners have urged the UK government to rethink the legislation and listen to industry voices. The National Farming Union, NFU, and the British Property Federation, BPF, has since written to the government, warning that if action is not taken, landowners will walk away and 5G ambitions will be missed, while Scotland's fragile connectivity will deteriorate further. Underserved parts of Scotland, like the Highlands and Islands and Argyll and Bute, are particularly at risk. However, official statistics also revealed that Glasgow is now amongst the UK's worst 5 cities for fibre coverage. While the city is Scotland's largest urban hub, just 57.8% of premises have access to full fibre broadband. The ongoing row between landowners and telecoms firms has also stalled the UK rollout of 5G, with the UK now ranked 30th out of 39 countries for availability. Legal disputes have also skyrocketed since the 2017 changes, reaching 1,000 compared to just 33 tribunal cases between 1984 and 2017. Landowners can challenge the rent cost once the lease comes up for renewal. However, the tribunal stage can be costly and off-putting. Mr. Glendinning added, "Understandably, many now view the process as high risk and low reward, which has led to real difficulties in securing new sites. That, in turn, has had a catastrophic impact on mobile connectivity, particularly in rural areas and increasingly in urban settings too. The PSTI Act doubles down on this framework, and there is a serious risk that the dysfunction we've already seen will only escalate. In cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow, where the pressures on property and infrastructure are already more acute, the burden placed on the landlord is often far greater, and without meaningful reform, it's hard to see how the necessary collaboration can be restored." A DSIT spokesman said, "Our priority is to continue delivering high-quality 5G networks across the UK, which is critical to boosting growth and improving public services for the British people." And that article was an exclusive by Rebecca McCurdy and was read to you today by me, Bob Lizer. From Herald, Scotland, 27th of June 2025. From the STEM section of the business section. Rocket company Orbex pushes Saxavord blastoff back to 2026. Article by Jodie Harrison. The first launch of one of the rockets scheduled to blast off from Scotland's spaceport has been pushed back until next year. Rocket company Orbex had intended to stage a launch later this year from Saxavord on Shetland, but has now said that it will happen in 2026. Moving parts, including infrastructure requirements and engagement with regulators, have been blamed for the delay. The hold-up means there is something of a space race taking place in Scotland. German company RFA, which already test-fired a rocket on the Saxavord launch pad, has said it intends to launch from Shetland this year, meaning this would be the first rocket to use the site. Late last year, it was announced that the Forres-based Orbex was shifting initial launch operations from a proposed spaceport in Sutherland in the Highlands to Saxe-Voorde. It aimed to launch its Prime rocket from Unst in late 2025, but the spokesperson confirmed to Shetland News that has now slipped to 2026. Earlier this year, it was also announced that Orbex had been awarded £20 million in investment from the UK government. A spokesman for the company said, "Following the decision to move our initial launch services to Saxe-Voorde Spaceport, we can confirm that the first test launch of Prime will now take place next year in 2026. Over the last few months, our teams have visited Saxe-Voorde to better understand the infrastructure and logistical requirements to launch from Unst, Shetland. Our launch team is also busy working on the infrastructure we need for our launch complex, the process for transporting our equipment and the rocket to Unst, and with the supply chain that will be helping us to achieve this." The spokesperson added, "Our decision to move to Saxe-Voorde has also necessitated us to work closely with the regulators, CAA, Ofcom, etc., to revise some of our launch licence activity. Together, these moving parts mean that Orbex has taken the decision to move launch to 2026 to ensure there is sufficient time to complete all of the pre-launch tasks required." Prime is described as a micro-launch vehicle capable of delivering payloads of up to 180 kilograms to low Earth orbit. It would be used to deliver satellites into orbit. Orbex is one of only 5 private companies in Europe, and the only British one, with a frame contract to launch European Space Agency or ESA satellites. And that article was written by Jodie Harrison. From Herald, Scotland, 27th of June 2025, from the STEM section of the business section. Why cyber resilience ought to be everyone's business. Article by Jude McCorry. The spate of high-profile cyber attacks we have witnessed recently is proof of the wide-ranging impact they can have on organisations and the public, and the importance of improving our collective cyber resilience. Several major UK retailers, including Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op, have been targeted by sophisticated attacks, disrupting operations and hitting profits. These incidents are a stark reminder that cybersecurity is not a tick-box exercise. It is an existential issue that must be treated seriously, from boardrooms to local communities. In Scotland and beyond, threats are evolving fast, and our response must evolve too. Marks and Spencer hit the headlines in April, when it announced it had been the victim of a cyber attack, and what happened next was a snowball effect. Online orders halted, card payments failed, staff couldn't order stock, and digital systems were down. The retailer has since warned of a £300 million hit to profits, with some impacts likely to continue into the summer. While the response was swift and professional, the effect on business operations and customer trust was severe. No matter how prepared we are, attackers remain several steps ahead. Cyber attacks don't just harm businesses, they affect communities. On Scotland's islands, residents often rely on a single local co-op for essentials, so the disruption was significant. Stock deliveries were delayed or unavailable, leaving customers without access to necessities. For island communities, where alternative options are limited, This disruption was a reminder of how vulnerable vital supply chains are in a digital-first world. Supply chains are only as strong as their weakest link. Businesses often depend on a complex web of suppliers and tech providers, where one vulnerability can affect many. Organizations must identify and manage cyber risks in their supply chains, both technical and human. Outsourcing a service does not outsource the responsibility. These recent attacks should serve as a reminder for public and private sector organizations to assess their own defences. Cybersecurity is often treated as a background function rather than a core element of operational resilience. Businesses should assess their preparedness, educate staff, test backup and recovery systems regularly, update and rehearse incident response plans, identify and manage cyber risks across supply chains. Cyber resilience is also a personal responsibility. Small, simple actions from individuals can reduce risk and improve wider resilience. The public should use strong, unique passwords, enable multi-factor authentication, MFA, where possible. Scotland takes a joined-up approach to cyber resilience through the Cyber Scotland Partnership, a hub bringing together government, law enforcement, industry and academia to raise awareness and strengthen national defences. The reality is simple. Organisations must be ready to prevent and respond to cyber attacks. Staff need to recognise threats and act fast. The time to act is now. Cyber resilience is not optional, it is essential. The recent attacks are a wake-up call that must drive change, not just conversation. Ultimately, it's up to each of us to act. Let's not wait for the next crisis to remind us what's at stake. The time to build cyber resilience is now. For more information, go to https://www.cyberscotland.com. That is www.cyberscotland.com. And if you are a victim of a cyber attack, contact Police Scotland on 101. And that article was written by Jude McCorry, who is CEO of the Cyber and Fraud Centre Scotland. Agenda is a column for outside contributors. Contact agenda@theherald.co.uk.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, rate and review, and tell your friends about our service.